Welcome to West Country Wanderings and welcome to another one in my Canal series. In fact, it's a return to Secrets of the Thames and Severn Canal, Sapperton Tunnel Part 2. I'm back here again at the Coates portal of Sapperton Tunnel, and above me there is the Tunnel House Inn, but it didn't used to be called that. We'll go and have a look at that shortly because I've got more information to tell you about that to add on to what I told you last time. It's fascinating. Sadly, it's closed at the moment. It's on the Bathurst estate, of course, and yeah, lots of connections to that. Well, we'll cover on that in a moment. But where were we last time? Well, last time I was here, we were talking about one Charles Jones and his son George, who was making threats, murderous threats indeed, to a Samuel Smith of the Canal Company, the Thames and Severn Canal Company. Well, he eventually, through lots of legal indeed, wranglings, got out of his contract to get on with constructing this amazing piece of engineering here, the Sapperton Tunnel. After he left, there were a series of 5 gangs of contractors who set about working and building the Sapperton Tunnel. Now, the navvies here set about working in earnest. They were working round the clock, including through the night, as I mentioned previously, and on Sundays too, which was quite unusual for those days. Now, the hive of activity in this quiet corner of Gloucestershire brought a lot of visitors here to see what was going on. Some people walked across, as I did last time, through Haley Wood there, looking at the various air shafts. Indeed, as they did so, they could hear explosions below, down through the air shafts, as the navvies worked. They were using gunpowder, of course, but using gunpowder using candlelight. In fact, in the records, it shows that £3,000, that was the sum then, I'll put what the equivalent of that is in monetary terms today, was spent on gunpowder alone, constructing this incredible feat of canal engineering here in Gloucestershire on the Thames and Severn Canal. They could hear all kinds of noises, explosions going off, and you can only imagine how dangerous the conditions were working underneath that tunnel as they progressed further and made headway, burrowing down through those air shafts, working in both directions and then eventually connecting up with each other. It must have been lots of dangerous hazard. You can only imagine how foul the air must have been in there during construction. But one of the things they did to improve the airflow throughout the burgeoning tunnel and its progress was to keep fires lit at the base of the air shafts. And this, because fires, we know, you get a draft of there. If you've ever had a coal log fire at home, you know the draft that it creates in an upwards direction. Well, they did that here and kept it glowing and burning all the time to improve the airflow throughout the construction. In fact, there is a solitary shaft which actually wasn't for building the tunnel itself because it's sited close to the portal at the other end, at the Sapperton end, which we'll look later in today's video. And that was built by one Ralph Shepherd for the sole purpose of improving the ventilation flow through this tunnel as it made its progress in both an easterly and westerly direction. But what of the men themselves? Where did they come from? How did they arrive here? And where did they live when this tunnel was being built? So behind me here is the wonderful Tunnel House Inn. It wasn't always called that. In fact, it was called the New Inn, literally because it was brand new. In fact, it was actually built by Lord Bathurst himself. We're currently on the Bathurst estate here, but sadly that has been closed since just before lockdown during the pandemic around 2018, 2019. Hopefully it will reopen again. But this inn was actually built for the sole purpose of providing accommodation and food for the navvies that were working on the Thames and Severn Canal while the Sapperton Tunnel was being built. But who were these navvies? Where did they come from? Well, if you can imagine that they needed mining experience. And where does mining experience come from? Well, yes, mines, specifically Cornwall, from the tin, copper and arsenic mines in Cornwall, and also from the various coal mines in places like Shropshire, Staffordshire and Derbyshire. And those men often moved with some single moved here, in accommodation. This has always been built with an upper floor, and the upper floor was specifically for a dormitory, and the downstairs was for a dining area. And obviously the men drank in there as well, as you can imagine. But some of the families were brought down and they lived in amongst other community, sharing with other houses, and people would rent out their rooms in both the village of Coates, not far from here, Tarleton and Sapperton. In fact, some of the single men actually married some of the local girls as well. The births, marriage and deaths record for these parishes around the Sapperton Tunnel area actually went up through the roof during the time of the construction of the Sapperton Tunnel. Now, the Thames and Severn Canal owners actually employed an innkeeper here, although it was built by Lord Bathurst. They employed the innkeeper directly for the specific reason of looking after the men. His name was John Marshall. He ran a very strict regime to stop the men drinking to excess and causing mayhem in the local area with the local populace. That wasn't all that was here. There were other buildings here. Alongside me here is the barn. Now, just to give you an example, this is actually quite a large site. There were stables on the site here. You've got the present day what's called the barn. I don't think that's an original building from when the Sapperton Tunnel was under construction, but the portal, the Coates portal of the Sapperton Tunnel, is just down there. So where you've got the building there, just as you look at it, just to the left of that, steps take you down to the Coates portal there, and the pub itself we're in, shall I say, is just behind me here. In fact, behind the camera is another driveway, so you had two access ways in, down that way towards the Coates portal of the Sapperton Tunnel, and that way, directly behind the camera, takes you on a carriageway in fact, to Hayley Wood, which is where, of course, they were building the air shafts, which were the primary source of the construction of the Sapperton Tunnel. So you had lots of facilities here. The men could sleep, board here. They could be fed, watered here. There was toiletry sanitation facilities here. There were stabling facilities for the horsing, drawing the materials that were needed during the construction of the Sapperton Tunnel. So this area would have been an absolute hive of activity, as well as the portals themselves and the air shafts just behind me in Hayley Wood. And just for completion, if you wanted to know what that looked like, that's the driveway down there, so which takes you into Hayley Wood directly from the site here at the new inn, what was later to become the Tunnel House Inn, right next to Coates Portal. Now, I've just come a short way into Hayley Wood. The Tunnel House Inn, you might be able to just make out some of the buildings, is just there. The reason I've done that, before I show you the portal at Sapperton, is because this, I believe, is the first air shaft after Coates Tunnel. So Coates Tunnel is literally just over the way there, and I think this would have been the nearest one they would have dug to Coates Tunnel here, to have dug down and then moved their way in an easterly direction to get through into Coates Tunnel, and then back this way, making along in the direction of the village of Sapperton. Now, on the portal itself here at the Coates end of the Sapperton Tunnel, you'll notice two niches, one there and one just round there, there we go, and a place up there for an inscription. Well, they were never actually used. It's not like they were gone missing. The original idea was to have two statues, one of Madame Sabrina, yes, of course, from the River Severn. You'll be familiar with that if you've been following my Severn Way adventures over the previous 2 years, and also one for Father Thames. So Father Thames, Madame Sabrina, of course, the Thames and Severn, linking those two magnificent rivers, but that never happened. And there was a space out the top for an inscription, presumably to list the engineers and the various workmen and masons that were involved in both building this incredible construction here. But that never happened, and it's always been blank with those two niches there and the inscription at the top. The one a little bit lower down was actually added during the restoration of this in the 1970s. I'll see if I can find a photograph of that. Sadly, since that restoration happened in the 70s, the front portal here at Coates has deteriorated again, and hopefully again it will be restored again. It won't need as full-on one as what it needed previously, but it could do with a little bit of cleaning up, I think. Just have a short break now, and I will go over to the Sapperton end, where there is another pub called the Daneway. But it wasn't originally called the Daneway. I'll tell you some more about that after this short break. Welcome back. I've now come round to the Daneway. The portal of the Sapperton Tunnel at Sapperton is just a little bit further there. In fact, it lies on the Wysis Way. That's the footpath that links the River Wye at Monmouth to Isis, or the River Thames, Father Thames, at Kemble here in Gloucestershire. But this, the Daneway Inn, was originally called the Bricklayer's Arms. Unlike the one we've just seen over at Coates, it was specifically built for the needs of the navvies building the Sapperton Tunnel. Where I'm standing at the moment is directly on the line of the canal, the Thames and Severn Canal. But sadly, many years ago, it was filled in to make a car park here. But yes, this was the Bricklayer Arms. There were some accommodation there for the navvies, but some camped up further up the hill there in the village of Sapperton. I want to go and have a look at Sapperton graveyard later on to see if there's any connection on the gravestones there to Sapperton Tunnel. A couple of other things to point out here though, and that is the bridge that's just behind me over there. So this bridge behind me carries the Miserdon, Edgeworth and Bisley Road, which is up that direction, to the village of Sapperton, which is in that direction. In fact, this road connecting this site here, which was once the Bricklayer's Arms for the Sapperton Tunnel, was actually constructed by the canal to connect this area, which was completely not developed at all before the Sapperton Tunnel site was built, with the village itself, about half a mile uphill. And as I say, we'll finish the video there today. So this bridge, obviously, that was built when the canal was coming through from the Stroud direction here, and we've looked at that area before there with the Daneway Lock there and all that area there, Sapperton Locks, going through Sycaridge Wood, which now is looked after by the Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust. The whole interesting area. It's just obviously sad that the canal disappears at this section here. Anyway, let's make our way along the Wysis Way and Thames and Severn Way to the portal of the Sapperton Tunnel here at Sapperton. So this is, of course, is the Sapperton portal of the Sapperton Tunnel. Now there is a little bit of mystery and the historians can't quite agree on who built each portal. It was thought that it was Ralph Shepherd and his masons that built the one that we saw previously at the Coates End, and this one, it is believed, was built by one Thomas Cook and his masons. Thomas Cook, incidentally, was also famous for building the Brimscombe port site. Of course, that is where the transshipment point was and the headquarters of the Thames and Severn Canal. But aside from the construction of the portal, this area here has a secret of its own, and it's quite substantial. And I think if you follow my railway series, yes, I did say railway series, as well as my canal series, you'll be interested in it. So what's this big secret to do with the construction of the Sapperton Tunnel? So what's my railway series got to do with something in here on my canal series? Well, the secret is that here, during the course of the construction of the Sapperton Tunnel, a railway was laid using sledge carts and flanged wheels. So you had two parallel strips of wood each side running on what would then later become the canal bed of the Thames and Severn Canal, running right about here, right into the tunnel itself through the portal as they made headway further along using those air shafts. It was a rudimentary affair, but it's believed to have been one of the very first, if possibly the first, temporary railway built for construction of a bigger project anywhere in the United Kingdom, possibly the world, right here in Gloucestershire. Yes, amazing. I only found out about that recently, but it's clearly described in Humphrey Household's book about the history of the Thames and Severn Canal. In fact, there was a visitor that visited the site here. As I said, this drew a lot of attention when this was being built here in Gloucestershire back in the 18th century, because it was a huge engineering project. Nothing of its scale had been done before. And that visitor to the site here at Sapperton remarked as follows: there is a stage or a platform for all the wheels, all the wagons, and a shoulder which is given to the wheel to prevent it slipping off. So yeah, it's flange wheels as we know them today on our present day railways. The wheels though are one solid piece of wood. The visitor also found a gang of 8 men at work, 3 miners, 2 loaders, 2 drivers, and 1 man emptying the wagon. So yeah, that's amazing to think that there was a railway here, running through here, the entrance Sapperton Tunnel, right through, well, to the headway, the workings that would obviously carrying on because of the air shafts going on in Hayley Wood there. Actually, the village of Sapperton is a little bit further on, and I actually just heard the children in the playground of Sapperton Primary School as I've been filming here now. So it just shows you how close we are to it. It's not thought that there was a railway at the other end where we started the video at the Coates End, just one here at Sapperton. I'm not sure the reasoning or the logic for that, but it would have been around this point here where we had that additional shaft that was only built not for construction, but purely to provide additional ventilation. I have scrambled up there this afternoon, but unfortunately I've yet to be able to find it. Now, as well as Ralph Shepherd, who built one of the portals, probably the one at Coates with his team of men, we also had other people being involved. Richard Jones managed to secure some favourable amount of contract with the builders, or the people that wanted ownership of the Thames and Severn Canal, and he actually managed to negotiate a rate of 7.5 guineas per yard of construction. I'll put what that is in present day money below, do the relevant calculations out of pound, shilling and pence, allowing for inflation. Should be appearing on the screen round about now. Also at that time you had John Knock, who was a Welshman, and he made huge progress on the tunnel, and he did 785 yards of progress on this amazing tunnel here. It's obviously here at the Sapperton portal of it. Yes, so he was incredible. John Mock actually was a Welshman coming from a coal mining background there in Wales, obviously able to bring a huge amount of skill from his mining there, coal mining in the South Wales valleys, here to this part of Gloucestershire. Unfortunately, Charles Jones, being a drunkard, we got dismissed. Sadly, Richard Jones, and I don't think the two were related, also was a little bit work shy, because one of the managers for T&S came over here and found that some of his men were working, but Richard Jones was unfortunately drunk by 2 o'clock, and some of his men had finished as early as 3 and also started drinking as well. So work shyness and drinking was a constant problem with the canal navvies and managed them here. But also bearing in mind, of course, they had to work under appalling and very, very dangerous conditions indeed. Now, Piner and George Bray were another famous team building the scratch, and they did between them around about 285 yards each. The concept of digging that out underground is just blows my mind. At the peak of construction here, the Sapperton Tunnel, when they were really cracking on with it, they had 8 teams of 8 men, so they had 8 gangs, and effectively in each gang they had 8 men working, and they worked on 8-hour shifts, so that's a full 24-hour round the clock working, 365 days working a week. So it meant there was around about between 200 and 300 men employed on the construction of the Sapperton Tunnel here in Gloucestershire on the Thames and Severn Canal. Jerry Lee and Thomas Barber were another famous crew that were working on the tunnel. In fact, they drove 370 yards of it, but it was down to John Knock's team to actually line that section of the tunnel. In actual fact, in terms of the geology of the tunnel, which is quite complex, we'll be discussing that more detail in part 3 here on Secrets of the Thames and Severn Canal, looking at the amazing Sapperton Tunnel. We're just going to go into a short break now. While the break's on, you watch a couple of ads, or not if you're on YouTube Premium. I'm going to make my way up there into the village of Sapperton to have a look at some of the gravestones there in Sapperton churchyard. See you right after this break. Well, I've now come around to St Kenelm's Church here in the beautiful village of Sapperton, which is now in the care of the church's Conservation Trust. So it's preserved as a church, but it's no longer actively used for church services. It's a beautiful church. There was an arts and crafts movement here. Lots of origins of that, some ornate wooden carvings. I've been wandering around the churchyard here, looking at the various gravestones, trying to make out what they say in relation to the construction of the Sapperton Tunnel. Now, we know from the records that families settled hereabouts in the village, they often stayed in lodgings, lodging with other families. They would have given them obviously rent to do that. The single ones stayed in the accommodation that we saw at the Bricklayers Arms and the New Inn, as we saw previously, plus other assorted temporary wooden accommodation hereabouts. So there were lots of activity with people moving from other areas like Cornwall, Derbyshire, Shropshire, Staffordshire, the coal mining areas, and tin mining in the case of Cornwall, of course, and copper mining down there, to this area here. And often those people, those miners, would have started courting the local girls here in Sapperton. And as I say, there were lots of increased number of births in the area during the construction of the Sapperton Tunnel. Unfortunately, it's very hard to make out the writing on a lot of the gravestones here. On the opposite end of the spectrum to births, because of the intermingling with the miners and the local girls hereabouts, was the deaths, and increased deaths, of course, because of the disasters that happened during the construction of the Sapperton Tunnel. Now, a visitor to the Sapperton Tunnel was asked about, was it a dangerous process, and he was told there had been a few instances of injuries, but that at that point there hadn't been any fatalities. Well, we know that to be true, not to be untrue, should I say. There were most certainly fatalities during the construction of the Sapperton Tunnel, and I'll be speaking more about that in part 3. Now, as to where the people were buried, the navvies, I think we have a grouping of them here. If you notice, we have some smaller gravestones in the front of me and behind me here. Unfortunately, it's not possible to make out what it actually says on them. But looking at the age of the gravestone, bearing in mind we're looking towards the end of the 18th century, 1770s, etc., you can see that these would have been put in around that time, which fits in with the date of the construction of the Sapperton Tunnel. So I wouldn't mind betting, I can't be certain, that these here in this area were the gravestones of the unfortunate men that lost their lives during the building of the Sapperton Tunnel. I have had a look around though to see if there's any evidence of people that had died that have said that they were from Staffordshire, Cornwall, etc. But as I say, it's very hard to make out where people are from when they've died, because it's a lot of wearing on the stone, and of course a lot of it's covered in moss. It's not a particularly bright day, so unfortunately don't have any specifics on names this time, but if I do have any more information during the course of my research for part 3, I'll bring that to you in the next episode. Well, I've been still looking around the graveyard, and I have found one gravestone which I think has links to our Sapperton Tunnel. And I think it says the gentleman's name was George Deakin. I think that's what it says. I'll put a photograph of it now. Now, a couple of interesting things about it. First of all, the date. He was aged 30 and he died in 1789. Now, 1789 is significant. As we know, the construction of the Sapperton Tunnel from video number 1 was commenced in 1784. What I haven't said yet is its completion date, which was 1789. So he died the year of completion. It completed later on in the year. I don't know the date that he exactly died, but at some point during that year he passed away. Well, how do I know he has links to Sapperton Tunnel? Well, obviously he died aged 30, the same year during the construction of the tunnel, so that's the one thing. I know he was from Frampton Mansell, so he was a local man, but it's the marks at the top of the plaque which kind of gives the game away. There was what looks like mason marks, so it looks like he was a stonemason. And there's also an inscription which to me certainly looks like a tunnel. It has concentric circles on it, and it then looks like the outline of a hill, which presumably is the hill that Sapperton Tunnel goes underneath from Sapperton to Coates Portal we've seen. So yes, certainly seen one which I am pretty certain has connections to a fatality at Sapperton Tunnel here in the churchyard of St Kenelm's in the village of Sapperton. Well, that's the end of part 2 of Secrets of the Sapperton Tunnel here on my Secrets of Thames and Severn Canals on West Country Wanderings. There will definitely be a part 3. We need to have a look at the geology of what's under that rock and the problems it meant for the people building this amazing piece of engineering. Also, after the canal tunnel opened, how did it operate? We need to have a look at that because it was quite a complex bit of operation. How did they ensure that boats wouldn't bump into each other halfway through the tunnel? Bearing in mind there's no towpath and there's no passing loop to give a railway parlance to it. But yes, it's just one long single section of tunnel. So how did that all come together? We'll look at that and more in part 3 of Secrets of the Sapperton Tunnel here on West Country Wanderings. Thank you very much for watching today. Hope to see you on the channel again very, very soon. All the best for now. Cheers. Goodbye.